I just want to welcome everybody to this virtual roundtable focused on statewide funding for expanded learning. And I'm really excited to share this opportunity with everybody to get to learn more about state funding as an overview, and also increases that are coming and opportunities for the field of after school, or as the California Department of Education and others call it, expanded learning. So which also includes before school, summer school, and so you'll hear that word a lot today. And there's nobody better to help us learn about and think through all of these opportunities and think through some strategies to help us leverage these than Heather Williams, who's with us. And Heather is the program director for policy and outreach for the California After School Network. And I had the pleasure of meeting Heather years ago when she was at the California Department of Education, working with the director, Michael Funk, to help develop a new direction, really, and a strategic plan for the then expanded learning division. And that process was engaging, inclusive, and pretty revolutionary, especially for an institution like CDE. And I think Heather has really taken those tenets of inclusion and innovation with her as she came to the California After School Network, and continues to innovate by making sure that policies are flexible enough during a pandemic to support expanded learning, right? And working and finding innovative ways to still communicate and to connect programs. So through programs that she developed, like the Fireside Chat, which is something that Heather does in collaboration with Michael Funk, from the director of the Expanded Learning Division, to help really share what's going on in the field of expanded learning, especially as all these policy changes are coming about, and also to connect people and lift up best practices and share how people around the larger statewide field of after school and expanded learning are navigating a pandemic as well. And so you'll see that there are links to those fireside chats, and also to the California After School Network website on the front page of the document. And Heather linked her presentation slides also in the resources section. So I think I just want to go ahead and hand it over to you, Heather. And we're so excited that you're able to help us understand this area that you are such an expert in.
Thanks, Mara. Very excited to be here with you all and sharing a chunk of the information, probably not all of it. And I'm sure in the less than hour that we have, we'll not be able to get through everything or answer all the questions. So I will apologize upfront for doing a lot of talking at the beginning. That's usually not how we like to structure things, but there is just so much going on. So I will have my contact information is on the slides as well. So if you all have questions or want to schedule follow-up conversations and discussions, I'm happy to do that. And thank you, Mara, for the wonderful introduction. And then I guess before I get started, the only other thing I'll say is my cat is joining me. She is asleep on my lap, but if you see cat movement, she likes to hang out on my Zoom calls. As we know, pets and children love our Zoom meetings. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And while I'm pulling this up, I think one question I have for you all, and this is not a test, but just kind of so I can start to gauge where you all are at in terms of how familiar you are with expanded learning and the statewide infrastructure around expanded learning. That you know, if you think about that on a scale of 1 to 5, maybe like, oh yeah, I've 5 being like, I totally know what's going on. I have lots of information, understand the infrastructure, that'd be a 5. 1's kind of like, I think there's a statewide program. I don't really know much about it. If you could just drop quickly in the chat where you imagine yourself to be at in terms of the 1 to 5 scale, and that will kind of help me gauge as I'm going through like how much information I should provide, how much in the weeds I should be. So thank you all for dropping those in. I'm seeing a lot between 1 to 3, so that's definitely helpful for me. And I will be kind of tracking the chat box as I go along. So if you do have questions or clarifications, please do feel free to drop those in the chat box and or stop me. I've been in expanded learning for almost 10 years, so sometimes we just go quickly through stuff and need to be reminded to pause and take a moment to explain things. So I'm gonna, before I jump into kind of the most recent context around expanded learning, I did want to talk about just a little bit of the basics of expanded learning in California. And so this is the definition of expanded learning that's in education code. So this is how the state has defined expanded learning. And as Mara referenced, it's not just after school. We are talking about before school, summer, and intersession learning experiences. And that's focused on academic, social, emotional, physical needs and interests of students. Expanded learning opportunities are hands-on, engaging, student-centered, results-driven, involve community partners, and complement learning activities. This is really important for our existing programs and the new programs. The legislature has made it really clear that expanded learning is not to extend the regular school day, but it's to complement it. So I always like to start with that. And then this is this image over here just kind of shows you roughly where the pre-pandemic 4,500 sites were located across the state. So as you can see, we have programs all over the state. Pre-pandemic, we were state funded through the ACES program and federally funded through the 21st Community Learning Center program. And kind of in any given year over the course of the year, serving about 980,000 students. And typically what that looked like was about 450,000 students on any given day. And the vast majority of these programs are funded exclusively by the state through the ACES funding. The 21st Century funding is important, but a significant amount comes from the state funding. And go to the next one. And a lot of the information I'm going to show is again kind of talking about pre-COVID, what we knew in terms of who we supported. And so expanded learning programs are really targeted at some of our most vulnerable students. And these are just some stats of, in terms of the students we serve. 84% socioeconomically disadvantaged, 9 out of 10, children of color. And you can see some of the other stats here, high proportion of Latino students, English learner students, etc. And then just a couple things about the outcomes or what expanded learning does. We have a ton of research, and I could have, we can send you pages and pages of the outcomes of expanded learning and after school programs. And this is something, hopefully, since you all do work with programs, you do see a lot of this, but we know they're really important for providing emotionally and physically, and it's not on there, is mentally safe, healthy, and engaging learning environments. We know that our expanded learning programs, there's a lot of research now that shows they create the conditions for protective factors. So things like developing caring relationships with adults, usually program staff from their own neighborhoods. Yes, I saw many of our faculty conduct this research, and we are very appreciative for that. This has really helped us make the case of why these programs are always so important, but especially in COVID. Student voice is very important in our programs. student voice and leadership. So students lend their voice to designing a lot of the programs as well. And so a lot of positive outcomes related to academic achievements, school connectedness, school attendance, positive social behavior, etc. And so this is just a couple graphics that kind of highlights some of those. This financial benefit in terms of the gain in attendance is huge. And so really, there are so many great and wonderful things about expanded learning, and we could probably spend the whole hour talking about just that. But I just wanted to pull out some of these key statistics. And like I said, these are all based off of ACEs and 21st century funding pre-pandemic. I also just wanted to highlight the quality standards for expanded learning in California. These were released in September 2014. The network, in collaboration with the Department of Education, convened field stakeholders, and a lot of our programs were already doing a lot of this work, but it really elevated the most promising practices from across the field. And so we do have 12 quality standards, and those are used throughout the field. All of our programs are expected to engage in continuous quality improvement around these standards. And then I also did want to kind of highlight our system of support for expanded learning in California. A lot of people, when they hear system of support, they think about CDE, the state's system of support. And so there is a broader system of support, but our system of support actually started first, and kind of the full state one is modeled after ours. And so we have this integrated system of support, and it's made up of the CDE Expanded Learning Division, 16 county offices of education, and you see those on the screen. CAN, the California After School Network, another statewide intermediary, ASAP Connect, and then we also have STEAM hubs that are based out of the county offices of education as well. And so we use this CSESA 11 regions, and in some regions, like up in Region 1, Mendocino County Office of Education serves the whole region, and then in others like Region 9, that is split up and served by 3 different county offices of education. And so there's about 70 folks in the system of support right now. That is growing a little bit and will likely continue to grow with the increased investments. But we come together formally 3 times a year, and then also throughout the year, and we are basically tasked with supporting all of the expanded learning programs throughout the state. And then just briefly, since I'm here on behalf of CAN, just wanted to share a little bit about CAN. We are one of 50 of state networks for after school, and so each state does have their own network. We're all structured a little bit differently with different impacts or different goals, depending on the needs of what is going on in the state. But this, I'm not going to read these, but this is just up on the screen to share a little bit about our purpose, our vision, our mission. And these were actually just recently updated by our leadership team. And so really elevating that, you know, we leverage out of school time programs, but we do that to ensure that we make a difference in the health and well-being of children, youth, and their families. So a lot of that is, well, it's centered and kind of driven through out of school time programs and expanded learning programs. We do like to collaborate and partner with a lot of folks outside of our field as well. And these are just our 4 kind of broad goal areas that talk high level about the work we do. Again, not gonna spend a lot of time reading those. Those are on the screen. And if you're interested, you have the slides, but that just kind of high level talks about some of the work we do. All right, so now I'm gonna transition a little bit to talking about the opportunity. And so talking about the big new funding source that was announced this May, And so in Governor Newsom's May budget revise in May, he announced basically that universal after school was something that he wanted to provide. And so through the way to go about that was adding this new ongoing funding source for expanded learning programs that is called the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, or for short, ELOP. And so our existing ACEs and 21st Century funds and the new ELOP funds are intended to be considered a single comprehensive program. And as I go through, there's a lot of similarities between the programs, so it's not meant to be individual separate programs, but really kind of one large expanded learning comprehensive program. And the intent is over time that the investment will grow, and eventually we will be able to offer all students access to expanded learning programs in California, specifically prioritizing our unduplicated students. And if you're not familiar with the term unduplicated, I was not super familiar with it before this year. I do have the official definition of that on the slide in a bit. So this is just some recent language that came out that high level describes the program. CDE and the state superintendent are prioritizing closing the opportunity gap for students who need additional supports beyond the instructional day. They're doing that through the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program. And so this year, there is $1.75 billion in funding in additional funding to support this work. And one of the questions we've got is there an opt-out option? There is not an opt-out option. This funding is going to all districts, and they are all expected to implement a program. So a couple things to consider about the opportunity. We've been telling folks it's a huge investment. We've not seen dollars like this before in expanded learning, but it is definitely a well-deserved investment. We know our programs have worked really hard, especially during the pandemic, and have been severely underfunded. And so it's significant. It's also well-deserved, and we will be advocating for it to grow to the full $5 billion that was announced. So this just quickly high level talks about the different funding streams that now exist in California to fund expanded learning programs. And so we've had ACEs and 21st Century programs for quite a while. 21st Century was initiated in 1996. All of the states have this funding. And then the ACEs program was initiated in 2006. And up until this year, you can see we had about $650 million in ACEs and 148 in 21st Century. This budget did also give a slight bump to our ACEs program, so that's now at $750 million. And up until this point, that was actually significantly more funding than most any other state across the country had. Most states, like I said, do have some 21st Century funding, but most of them do not have the unique state investment. So we were kind of already the goal for many states in terms of funding, but then COVID hit, and there was a lot of recognition for the work of the programs. And so there's been some multiple investments in expanded learning opportunities. I won't spend too much time around this, but I do want to highlight that AB 86 is part of the federal recovery activity from the state. And so there's expanded learning opportunity grants that was initiated in the spring. This is different than the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program. So there's some of that's explained on the slide, and I'll highlight as we go through again. But in May, the governor did announce the new Expanded Learning Opportunities Program. So $1.75 billion this year, and intended to grow to $5 billion in the next 3 to 5 years. So Oh, yes, Mara, I'm seeing your note about a quick explanation of ACEs in 21st century. I should have, and I can go back and add this, so I'll add some. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'll drop a resource into the chat box, and this is our state of expanded learning. And this is a really good resource that talks about ACEs in 21st century and the history of those two. But I think the most important thing to know is ACEs program. The ACEs funding was initiated by Prop 49. So that is something that is pretty well set through the proposition process. Oh, thank you. Yes, that's a great resource as well. And the ACEs program serves grades kindergarten through 8th grade, and then 21st century is a federal investment in after school, before school, summer programs, and that can be used to serve elementary, middle, and high school students. And so we also do have some high school programs. And let me drop this into the chat box, and oops, I'll cover a little bit more of that in just a moment. Lots of things on screen. All right, so back to the ELO funding, we know there's been a lot of confusion because they are both titled the same. The Expanded Learning Opportunities Program is what we're talking about. This is the new funding stream specifically for expanded learning programs that works with the existing ones. The ELO grants are the COVID-19 relief and reopening grants. And so those fund expanded learning as well as some other learning recovery strategies, and they're one-time funds. So they can be used, but they're not part of like this ongoing infrastructure. We've also just had a lot of questions. A lot of folks don't know where to start in terms of this new funding. We have a lot of districts that have never received funding before, or have not received funding in a good amount of time, that are asking where to start. And so we kind of give people two suggestions. One is start from an asset-based lens. You can do a lot with this. So what do you want to grow for your kids, youth, staff, and communities? And then also there was a lot of anxiety. The funding actually just recently went out. And so districts are expected to have a program up this year, but it's not expected to be fully up and running. It's a ramp up year, and that is very much recognized by the Department of Education and the legislature. So let's see, just tracking time. So this is a little bit more of ACEs in 21st century versus the ELO grant and the ELO program. So ACEs in 21st century funding are ongoing. The ACEs funds are state funds, federal 21st century funds. They are application based. So schools do need to apply for them, and they are school-based awards. And so they are, sometimes the grantee will be a district, but they are applying for individual school sites. So they would say, like, we're applying for these 5 school sites, and the funds are awarded through an RFA process to those individual sites. I'm going to skip over the ELO grant process. The ELO program is a little bit different. It is ongoing, and it's intended to work with those funds, but there's no RFA process, no application. It's formula based. It goes to the LEAs, and the LEAs determine what schools and sites they want to fund. So ACEs 21st century, ongoing, RFA, competitive, and then the ELO program, ongoing as well, but formula-based apportionments. Um, that is a great question, Mara, and I am going to get to that in a moment because that is actually not an easy question to answer. I already talked about the intent of the program, so I'm going to skip over that. And if you enjoy reading education code or assembly bills, feel free to take a look at these. This will give you access to AB 130, which is the education trailer bill that established the program. And then we've had some amendments already in September, and we do expect a number of additional cleanup bills to go through as we kind of discover more things that need clarification or to be updated. So eligibility, school districts and charter schools for grades TK through 6 are eligible for the funding. So that kind of answers your question, Mara, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, and I'll get to that in a moment. It is for LEAs, so school districts and charter schools. It's not for county offices of education, and there are certain charter schools that are ineligible, but the bulk of school districts and charter schools are eligible. I've already mentioned this, but the funding is $1.75 billion this year. It's based on unduplicated student enrollment in grades TK through 6. So the way they come up with the calculation for what districts get is based off of that. It's a little bit more of a complicated funding formula. That's in one of the later slides. If you really want to get into the funding structure, you can read more about that. But when we're talking about unduplicated students, we're talking about those that are classified as English learners, eligible for free or reduced price meal, or foster youth. And so this year, the funding is really prioritized for LEAs that have 80% or more of their students that are considered unduplicated. And again, fun legislation, then you use terms like pupil and unit, but we're talking about students here. So the funding is roughly $1,170. That's based off of attendance and some other things. But that is for school districts that are prioritized this year. They will receive more funding. School districts that have less than 80%, I believe they're at 600, mid 600s in terms of how much they're receiving per unit. The funding is for the whole school year and intersession. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And funding's provided for at least 3 years at a time. So the funding amount doesn't shift drastically each year. And then one of the things, as the legislature recognized this year's a ramp up, funding that districts receive this year can also be used next year for the program as well. So if they don't use it all this year, they'll be able to use it next year. Again, if you are like working with school districts and you're curious how much funding they're getting, all of that's on the CDE website. So you can click on that link and go through and find out exactly how much they're getting. They're getting, the first funding amount is actually, was just announced to go out this month. So in future years, they'll receive it throughout the year, but we're a little delayed this year as we get started. And then that 1170 per unduplicated is intended to grow to 2,500 per unduplicated in future years. So that does get to, they're planning to invest $5 billion into this program over time. A lot of that is just to be determined. We'll likely this budget cycle have a better idea of how that'll grow each year. Our current programs can charge for fees and are required to have a local match. So one of the things that comes up is, can programs charge fees? And so now this is the same across the board for all of our programs. They can, but they have to waive them for FRPM eligible students, those that are homeless, and those that are in foster care. And unlike our ACES program, matching funds are not required for this program. If you are feeling about like this at the moment, I totally get it. That's how we feel most days. There's a lot of moving pieces, and kind of tracking it all can be a lot. And even though I spend all day, every day in the weeds of this program, I'm still finding out new information about the program. So if you feel like this, we are with you and totally get it. Yeah, it looks like a lot of folks reopening plans for sure. All right, days and hours of operation. So one of the things that the legislation does is talk about like when the program needs to run. So any day that school is in session, if the school, like a typical school day, runs roughly 6 hours, then 3 additional hours have to be added on, so that there is a total of 9 hours of programming each school day. And the districts have flexibility. So if a school doesn't need a before school program, they can just have the school day and then 3 hours after. If they need a lot more, if their students and families need more access before school, they could do 2 hours before and just 1 after. So it's 9 hours, and it provides flexibility within for each district and even within sites. So the district can determine what, and it's a minimum of 9 hours. It can also run longer as well. So the 9 hours is just the minimum. And then during intersession days, so programming, there needs to be an additional 30 non-school days during intersession that programming is provided. So summer school is where a lot of those days will probably come from, but we have year-round districts or folks who take off, 2 weeks in the winter or a week in spring. And so programming can be provided on any of those days. Again, it's up to the district to figure out which 30 days meets the needs of the students. And those days need to be 9 hours. There's also a lot of questions around attendance, and I do have some, I won't go over them in detail, but they're available in the slide deck. Attendance is based on the needs of student and family. It's very different than the way our current ACES and 21st century programs are right now. But basically, if a student, there's a lot of language about providing access to students, but how often students attend is really based on the individual needs of the student and the family. So there's a lot of flexibility there. And then in terms of programming, programming looks a lot like our existing ACES and 21st century. Programs can provide before school, after school components on one or more multiple sites in the LEA. So the school district basically prioritizes programs at sites in the lowest income communities while maximizing the number of schools and neighborhoods with programs. That's what's in the legislation. So the LEAs get to decide where they want to put programs, taking in consideration kind of those guidelines. And then the program standards are very similar to ACES. They're almost identical with the exception of they don't include all of the things that ACES does, but in many cases they are similar. And we are requiring everybody to create a new program plan for the Expanded Learning Opportunities program. It will look very similar to ACES, and CDE is working on that right now. So some of the big pieces of that, programs have to have educational and literacy elements, and it kind of gives some examples there. And then it must include an educational enrichment element, provide some examples there, and then snacks in our meals. And there's more guidelines about that in Ed Code of what that means as well. And then staffing, staffing qualifications are also very similar to ACES, including the current ratio of 20:1. And then the one exception is for the new funding. They did call out that programs serving TK and K need to have a staff ratio of 10 to 1, so 10 students to 1 staff member. And then Mara, this is getting back to what you were asking about in terms of like what students can be served. So the funding's based off of your unduplicated students in TK through 6. In a lot of places, it'll say K6, but wherever it says K, that includes TK or pre-K. But once you, like if you are, for example, a district and you have elementary, middle, and high school students in your district, the funding you receive will be based off of the number of students in TK through 6. But if you meet the minimum requirements for serving those students and you have additional funds, then you can always exceed the requirements and serve additional grades, provide additional hours. So going back to like, you can have a 10-hour day, you can serve middle school students, you can serve high school students, but you need to meet the minimum requirements of the program first, and then you can provide those additional opportunities. And then this one, this is where I've been getting a ton of questions recently, and this is one that really, I think, opens the door to a lot of partnership and flexibility. LEAs are encouraged to collaborate with community-based organizations and childcare providers to maximize the number of expanded learning opportunities offered across. So we've gotten a lot of questions like, oh, well, do I need to like run this program on a school site? Does it need to be run by schools like LEA staff? Similar to our ACEs and 21st century programs, there's complete flexibility to, once an LEA receives funding, they can have subcontracts with their community-based organization partners. And so a lot of our current programs are already run by CBOs. That is certainly allowed and encouraged with this new funding stream as well. You know, can you bring in staff from other programs to run an hour of this enrichment activity? Yes, you can certainly do that. Can you pay for students to access a local museum? And like part of your programming is every day you send students to this local museum. Yes, so as long as you meet the minimum requirements in terms of just having like the core elements and the staffing requirements, you have a lot of flexibility to use those dollars to partner with whoever makes the most sense in meeting the needs of your students. So lots of exciting opportunity here. Do want to flag a couple of resources, and some of these are already in the Google Doc Mara shared, and then there's a couple more. And then I think that's it. This has my contact information. I'm going to stop sharing for now because I've been looking at that for a bit. So if you go into the slide deck after that slide with my contact information, there are a bunch of additional slides with much more like in the weeds kind of details around attendance and that type of thing. But I didn't want to get necessarily into all of that at the moment, since I kind of already shared a lot of information. So I will pause there.
Thank you, Heather. That's an amazing amount of information. Thank you for putting that together for us and creating that slide deck and sharing it with us. I know that everybody will likely be able to go back and examine different pieces of it. So thanks, Ellen. Thanks for joining. So I think I saw one question in the chat from Sue already a while ago, and I put it in our notes doc. I'll put it back in the chat also. I started a section in our notes doc for questions, so people should feel free to write their questions in the chat or to raise their hand. I think I imagine most of the questions are going to be along the lines of what Sue was saying, so that their partner school at El Sol already receives funding for their extended day program, but UC Links isn't currently a part of the funding. So wondering if there is new funding that could be used to integrate our activities with the existing program. I think the idea is how can UC Links partners work with LEAs and schools, in order to help support the students and better align with and work with the district and school partners. And Sue, feel free to keep us on task if we're not answering your question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things I definitely want to highlight is, and I'm sure this is like a common, I know this is a common challenge throughout education and then through a lot of other sectors, but like everyone else, we're experiencing quite a bit of workforce shortages. And so one of the things we've seen from LEAs and some of the why we even have language around opt-out is districts are overwhelmed. There is a lot of funding that's coming to them for this and other programs. And so while the funding is great, they're not sure how to like put together all the plans and how to staff everything up. And they're having trouble, staffing their current programs. And so one of the things that we've really tried to encourage LEAs is that this is a very good opportunity to partner with different organizations and leverage them, because they can count, if they meet the minimum staffing requirements, which varies by LEA, but I'm fairly certain most folks within the UC Links system would meet those minimum requirements. Those staff can count. And so it's not necessarily a matter of like hiring all of these new staff. It is finding partners and bringing them in. And those partners can help with the programming. They can help towards addressing some of the staffing issues. So I think, a good way to partner with your school districts is whoever you know already within the school district, going to them like, I understand you have X amount of dollars, and you can pull all of that from the CDE website. I understand you have X amount of dollars for this new program. And, do you have a plan? Is there a way we can help? Is there a way we can help staff? Is there a way we can provide some of the enrichment activities that you all need? And so coming to them with like, we know this is new funding. We know there's challenges staffing and building this out. What can we do to help? So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And if you already have some partnerships certainly starting there to leverage those and then build on them. So I don't know if that answered your question. I felt like I kind of talked around it.
Sue, did that help? Oh, go ahead.
I mean, no, that's good. It's kind of exciting, and I'm glad that we have the ability to find out how much they're getting, because I know El Sol has been around for 25 years, and now they have senior staff, that are running certain things, and I know most of us understand that schools have gatekeepers for these kinds of things. So I mean, if we already come in not asking them what their situation is, but having some knowledge behind us, that's kind of nice. And, as long as we're diplomatic about it. And even starting new partners, like that would be, I think I'm excited to just think about this in terms of expanding the work that we're doing to other sites. Sorry.
And I think one of the things that Mara and I talked about that might be a good future opportunity is the slide that I referenced that talked about our system of support. So we have, CAN works at the statewide level, and we support folks all the way from the local level on up, but we also do have those 16 county offices of education that are much more deeply connected to the programs in their regions. And so one potential opportunity would be to structure a time with this group and that group where you would be able to like get some of this, get some more overarching context about partnership opportunities, and then, you know, go in a breakout room. If you're based in Orange County, for example, put you in a breakout room with the folks that are based in Region 9 and have some conversations about collaborative opportunities. And so then if there are like if you're connected to one school but you want to be connected to more, they can really help you understand and navigate the system on a more local level.
That was one of the questions that I had put into the question doc, was how UC Links might be able to participate in or contribute to that system of support. Because I know another thing that we had talked about, Heather, is and maybe this is just me being more hooked in and being able to share some of those resources with the UC Links network. But I think, Heather, you were saying like sometimes there's, you know, trainings that are done for at the system of support level, and where people from UC Links and other partners could attend those as well, right?
Yeah, so we have our, like I mentioned, we have every 3 times a year, we have our kind of larger meetings, but then we typically have ongoing monthly like professional development opportunities or structured time that are drop in, kind of optional, but most folks participate in. So kind of anytime there would be an opportunity for collaboration and partnership, we can figure out how to bring in this group. And then the other thing is, so we have these statewide meetings, but a lot of the county office folks will have what they call like grantee meetings or grant manager meetings or whatnot. And so they a lot of times have local folks come in and do presentations to all the grant managers. So again, just picking on Orange County, but if you're like, so if you're based in Orange County and you want to kind of start to build partnerships there, they might during one of their grantee meetings invite you to like come up and spend 30 minutes talking about who you are, what you can offer, and that way you would be able to give that presentation to all the grantees all at once, and then go from there in terms of building connections. And then Sue, they might have particular sites to your other question in the chat. They do have a better understanding of the landscape and like who's looking for what, and so they likely could recommend individual LEAs or sites that were looking for a partnership.
And for Santa Ana in particular, Sue, I think I sent you also a link to one of the recent fireside chats, because the Santa Ana district folks have been kind of featured in those as people who are really working hard at this planning, and so would likely be open to more partners and collaborators. So that might be a good place to start also.
Definitely.
Were there other questions? I think I don't want to cut anybody off, but not seeing anybody at the moment. Just thinking about kind of, you know, like UC Links usually is working with, you know, a couple days a week, you know, and oftentimes in it as part of an existing after school program, you know, so that might be school funded, or it might be 21st Century, or it might be ACES funded, or it might be school based, or you know, at a Boys and Girls Club, or and I could imagine what some of this funding might be able to do would be to help expand so UC Links provides some funding, right? But if there was additional funding on the school site side, it would allow some of those resources to go a little further. So maybe programs would be able to, like you said, expand to another school or offer more days. That's what kind of how I was envisioning this, being able to work with districts and school partners to think about how, the already really solid practices that are focused on literacy and on enrichment, could help these districts do what they're trying to do. And I think it would just be a matter of, for us on the UC Links side, the people who are, staffing these programs are the undergraduates who are in these courses. And so they would be supplemental to existing staff. But I could also see situations where the undergraduates, if the school sites need staff and the undergraduates need part-time work, there could also be a match there. So I don't know, do other people have other ideas about how this funding could work, or how you would see yourself potentially tapping into this to help expand your work potentially to new sites?
Just chiming in, I want to echo what Sue said before. This was really good. I had no idea about the network of funding. And so it helps me because I work with, we have a partnering school, and we support quite a bit of enrichment that is complementary to the school programming. So I can see where a lot of the work we do associated with community-based literacies would be appropriate. I'm just trying to think how this can also enhance the UC Links network as well, because what I would want is something that maybe each of us, I'm just trying to think creatively on how we can, that building a stronger relationship with our schools can also help provide a stronger connection across our network. And so I'm just thinking out loud, if there's a number of us who are interested in having these conversations with key leaders, with our LEAs, and can you please remind me exactly what LEA stands for? I know it means Harding Elementary, for example, but what is that? What does the acronym stand for?
It stands for Local Education Agency, and there's technically various entities that are considered LEAs, but in this case, we're typically referencing school districts, and then there are, of course, a lot of standalone charters that are LEAs because they don't actually belong to a school district.
That's great. Yeah, I think in fostering conversations across those of us who, I've had some conversations with district leadership and school leadership, ways that we can help one another. That's what I would be interested in doing, and thinking of ways that we can collaborate. And I think that, and I wouldn't be surprised, I think this is what Sue might have been alluding to, but this is what I'm feeling is, we support, I think every year I put in about 60 grand worth of funding into our local schools, and, for supporting the programming that we do. And so, that takes money out from what we would do for other programs. So this is helpful to learn about, well, if they're getting a lot of this funding for the things that we're doing, already, because we are a CBO, I'm getting all these 3-letter acronyms down, then I think that maybe we can help one another with the kind of languaging and the ways that we're connecting and having conversations with school and district leadership.
we just have about a minute left, but I wanted to point to, let's see, oops, I wanted to point to in the chat, I just have a quick link to a feedback form because I'd love to hear your 2 cents. Alessandra just sent me a note. Can I mention that note, Alessandra? Alessandra, I was just asking if it would make sense, and Heather, you could help answer this, for like Alessandra and Sue, who are both working in Santa Ana in different schools, would it make sense for them to be contacting the school district together?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to the extent that there is more like collaborative work, I think that's beneficial on all sides, right? So if the school district is getting contacted, you know, by multiple people doing the same thing, but like different emails, but or getting, you know, kind of one email that says like, hey, we all kind of work in your school district and want to partner better, then I think they're probably more inclined to engage where they already see the collaboration happening.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think hopefully some of these districts, like you may be able to find out, maybe they have an open planning process, right? Where maybe the meetings are open or they're sharing, and maybe there's somebody at your school site who might know about it or somebody at your community-based organization who might know. So I think part of it is a little bit of detective work right now, but it's also thinking that this detective work is building toward the future, since this funding, as Heather said, is ongoing, that any work put in now, you know, it's not like you have to stress out that you haven't contacted them already and that you have to do it tomorrow. I think now is the time, but it's also, there will be opportunities going forward as well. And we can likely help to make some of those connections if you're really stumped and don't have any inroads to your district, you know, that you can reach out and we may be able to help make some connections there. Oh, right. El Sol is an LEA, so it's a little bit different than Santa Ana. So yeah, there may be some nuance there. Heather, I'm gonna hand it over to you for any last words, and also just leaving this in the chat for people, if you could just take a moment and send us your thoughts on the webinar today and what other ways we can help.
Yeah, thank you. Not a ton of last words. I guess I would just say thanks for having me. We really do want to make sure that the expanded learning ecosystem is more collaborative and in more partnership with all of these other systems across the state. So I'm glad to be here and glad to, you know, continue the conversation as needed.
Thanks, Heather. We really appreciate you making the time and sharing all these resources, and thanks to everybody who made the time to come, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.